Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session on how AI is reshaping the demands on infrastructure. With me here today, I have Russel, who's the CEO and co-founder of LiveKit, and Alon Arvatz, who is the CEO and co-founder of PointFive. I'm going to throw to you initially just to tell us a little bit about what you do and your companies. So, Russ, I'll start with you.
I'm the founder, CEO of a company called LiveKit. And LiveKit, probably to put it simply, allows you to build applications that can do something that they've never been able to do before. And that is, they can see you or see your screen, they can hear, and they can speak back to you. So we give kind of AI agents the ability to, we give them eyes and ears and mouths. So we're infrastructure to build that type of application.
And I'm Alon Arvatz, the CEO of PointFive. PointFive is a cloud and AI efficiency posture management. We actually help organizations understand if they're running their cloud and AI workload efficiently and optimize in order to reduce cost.
Great. And I'm Ayesha Javed. I'm a senior editor at Time Magazine, and my focus is business and technology. So, just to kind of kick off, we know that AI is sort of reshaping demands on infrastructure in a massive way. Latency needs to feel human. Costs need to scale sustainably. Systems need to act with autonomy. Both of your companies, PointFive and LiveKit, are building infrastructure that allows developers to move faster and experiment more. So I want to initially kind of talk about going sort of beyond the model. Models are kind of seen as the brains. LiveKit kind of provides the nervous system. PointFive acts as the metabolism. I'm going to throw to you first, Russ. Everyone's kind of focused on the models. What do you think is often overlooked about the infrastructure that actually makes them, useful in real-world applications?
So I think that, the way I sort of think about this is that even the large frontier AI labs talk about intelligence like a public utility. So almost like electricity. But to really harness the power of electricity, you still need all this infrastructure to be able to do it. So you need power plants and power lines and batteries as intermediary storage, and you need meters, you need charging stations. There's all kinds of infrastructure that allows you to harness the power of electricity and what it can do for you. And I kind of think of intelligence, or maybe LLMs, as another way to think about that, as this raw material that still requires a harness. And so while it may not be as exciting or interesting as the kind of core LLM magic, it's still like necessary in the stack to be able to really leverage it and build applications that use this kind of raw material.
And where are you sort of coming across bottlenecks, and how are you sort of handling those?
Yeah, so I think that one really interesting thing about the infrastructure that LiveKit works on is that the core infrastructure of the internet wasn't actually designed for voice and video, or vision, computer vision. When you think about like HTTP, that's what most of the internet is built on top of. That stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, not hyper voice or hyper video. It was infrastructure that was designed for a world where you're transferring text over a network back and forth. And it wasn't optimized for latency. But when you're having a voice conversation like we're doing right now, I'm responding to you within 200 milliseconds, and then you're responding to me. You're processing the information that I'm saying very, very quickly. And that actually necessitates a fundamental shift to support an application like that, a computer program that you can talk to and that can talk back to you. To facilitate that requires having to rethink all of the infrastructure underneath, even down to the protocol level, just to be able to build something that behaves in that way. So we've kind of had to think about everything from the ground up with like fresh eyes, and to a degree push aside a lot of the infrastructure that the internet has been built upon for the last 20 to 30 years.
Yeah, and I want to throw to you as well, Alon, in terms of the kind of bottlenecks that you see in your kind of process.
Yes. So first of all, I want to make a very basic statement about going beyond LLMs. The fundamental problem with LLMs is the fact that they're a black box. You have no idea what happens. You send a question, you get a response. You have no idea what happens behind the scenes. Okay? And that put the person, the user, in a place where he doesn't always have trust in what he's getting back. And if Russ, for example, is making LLMs more accessible, PointFive and other companies are trying to make LLMs more trustworthy, to help people trust them, understand what happens behind the scene, and essentially moving power to the people. And if you ask me about bottlenecks, for example, my perspective is that the biggest bottleneck is not technological. It's about trust and making people trust the LLMs and trust AI agents so they can use it more extensively. And when I say trust, it means make sure it's secured. Now that I give AI agent take actions independently, I have no idea what he's going to do. He can exfiltrate data. He can delete stuff. And I also talk about efficiency. And that's what PointFive does, for example. We help companies gain confidence in the efficiency of how they use AI and how they use the LLMs. Because, hey, it's really, really expensive, AI. Really expensive. And it can blow up very quickly. So you want to make sure that you know that behind the scenes, things are running efficiently and you actually have a positive ROI and gain the business value that you want to get out of the AI. And I think once we can release this bottleneck of trust, people will start to use AI a lot more extensively.
Can you kind of expand more on that, how you do gain the trust of users and customers?
Absolutely. I will give you a very basic example. Let's look at the cloud providers today. AWS, Azure, Microsoft, and Google. They basically do wrappers for LLMs. And that allows you, among other things, to choose what model you want to use. You can use one day OpenAI, the next day you can use Anthropic, for example. So when you're getting observability into how efficient each model is for you, what's running the same operation on two different models, and I say, okay, it's going to cost me like this with Anthropic, with Claude, it's going to cost me like this in OpenAI. Now I can say, okay, I need to use now OpenAI. After I checked it, I validated, and I know this is the most efficient way for me to run my LLMs or my AI operations. So that's the kind of trust and confidence that people need to get when they're starting to use more and more AI.
I think just to tie on to what Alon said, I think that when it comes to voice, and even in chat too, I think trust is probably the biggest gating factor between what we see out there, on X as a demo, and what will actually scale to kind of production, and what larger corporations especially will feel comfortable with deploying and putting in front of their users. On the trust angle, I think from a product perspective, like evals and observability are the two things, and they're closely tied together, that kind of prevent people from feeling comfortable with rolling out LLMs. I mean, LLMs are fundamentally probabilistic computers, so they process information and generate responses more similar to how a human does than traditional code, where you're writing kind of like, this procedure algorithm, and it's going to behave the exact same way given a set of inputs. Every time the output will be the same or predictable. That's not the case with an LLM. And so how do you first kind of test this system? With humans, they get high school diplomas and college degrees and job interviews and take-home assessments and things like this. You almost have to evaluate an LLM-driven application in a similar way. You have to run it through thousands of trials with different permutations of the inputs to see what kind of comes out and build a statistical confidence that, okay, this is safe and somewhat predictable to roll out to large numbers of users. And then on the observability side, you need to be able to take that same evaluation system and capture all of the interactions that are happening with real users out there, see if there are adversarial examples, or if guardrails are kind of circumvented by the LLM, and then take those examples, feed them back into your evaluation system, make a change to your system prompt or your application code, and then run the simulation again, and then deploy and scale and observe and do that kind of flywheel, get that flywheel spinning. And so I think that eval paired with observability stack, those kind of core components is what is fundamentally not quite mature yet, and is probably the largest kind of thing preventing us from deploying LLMs everywhere at scale.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, sort of related, the customer ultimately, they want reliability, they want visibility. How have you seen expectations from customers sort of changing in this kind of AI era?
Yeah, I think that, so reliability is effectively evals, right? It's that you can trust that if I put this thing in front of people and they give it all kinds of inputs, I'm gonna get some kind of predictable type of output. So that's reliability. And then visibility is observability. It's like, how do I see or peer into this system? Like Alon was saying, right? It's a kind of a black box right now. How do I peer into it, kind of get an understanding of how it is actually working when it's out there and in its steady state? And so I think those two pieces, the thing that has changed is that it's become more important than ever. And that's because, like I was saying before, that you now have a computer program that behaves stochastically, and that's kind of it's a bit of a scary thing. And so you need these two aspects, or you need infrastructure that makes it easy for a company doing something like, say, patient intake at a hospital to get an understanding of, like, when I get 1,000 phone calls from people with different kinds of issues that they're calling in about, am I able to actually get appointments booked with their doctors and process them and understand if they have insurance coverage and all of that stuff. And so you need more predictability and then being able to see what comes out at the other end. That's what I would say is that's become more important than ever. So the emphasis is now on that, and that's at least what we're seeing with customers that we work with.
I totally agree, and I want to talk about it in a different way. So you mentioned about the importance of reliability and observability, and we work a lot with enterprises, and that's all true. But I think that because of AI, the focus is changing. In changing from reliability, for example, to innovation. They care a lot more about innovation. Why? Because they're really, really scared that they're going to be disrupted. They totally understand that with AI, what they've built in decades, suddenly someone can replace them in a couple of years. So they're really, really stressed. I work with enterprise. I can see the stress in their eyes. So they're actually moving a lot more, putting a lot more focus on innovation and implementing AI so they can run faster. It's got to a very funny position where I met with a very big enterprise, and he asked me if we're using AI behind the scenes. And I was like, hey, why do you care? Look at the outcome. Why do you care what we're doing behind the scenes? And he told me that if we're using AI, it will be a lot easier for him to buy PointFive because he's measured on buying solutions that leverage AI. Now, that's a very, very bad KPI, in my opinion, because you have to measure things based on outcomes and not based on what happens behind the scenes. But it just shows you the level of stress that they're at. And I think that for the world, it's a blessing because it just pushes them a lot more towards innovation and being a lot less risk averse.
Yeah. And I mean, I want to ask both of you this. How are you thinking about success? How are you measuring success beyond kind of uptime and latency?
I think for us, and Alon said it as well, I think that, as infrastructure, I think that there are just some fundamental things that must be true. So uptime, reliability, the thing about infrastructure is that it has to always work, right? But that's kind of just that's the table stakes. I think on top of that, when you start to work with customers, it's more outcome driven, right? And outcomes are vary based on kind of the use case or the category that a developer is kind of playing in. So I mentioned earlier, like patient intake at a hospital, that is, it's kind of appointments booked with doctors is like an outcome. In customer support, it's tickets or issues resolved. That's another outcome. And so, for insurance claims processing, claims processed, right, is an outcome. So there are these kind of like these metrics that are very specific to kind of the use case or vertical. And I think when people think about kind of leveraging AI or building with AI, what they're really looking at beyond just kind of like the primitives that they use that we provide, say, as part of our product offering, they're really thinking about like, okay, well, how do I take AI and use it to improve the outcomes that I'm seeing currently with whatever system I have in place that's currently handling kind of this workflow. I don't know if you see kind of something similar, but
no, absolutely. And I totally agree about the outcome piece. The focus should be on outcome and not on actually using AI. Another thing that I would like to highlight is that when you think about outcomes, you also need to think about it from business value and ROI perspective. The thing about AI right now, maybe it will change in the future, is that because it's very expensive, it can get to a point where it's actually cheaper to hire a person to do the same work. So in the past, when you thought about, okay, let's automate things with software, for example, it was always cheaper to do it with software. Almost always it was cheaper. Today, with agents that can run independently and run multiple tasks, and it's very hard to predict what they're going to do, it can become very, very expensive, very, very fast. So when you look at outcomes, you should also understand, okay, but how much I also invested? And was it actually worth it? So the outcomes are good, but do I have a positive ROI? And that's exactly the balance that you need to hit when you start using AI more extensively.
And so do you think that there needs to be, or that there we'll see more kind of discipline in where we are kind of bringing that, those use cases in versus kind of going back to the
Absolutely. And we also see enterprises very, very careful with the usage of AI. So everyone's talking about AI. We looked at our enterprise customers. What % of their cloud spend, for example, is used for AI? 2.5%. That's it. That's what we're talking about. So we can see that they're very, very careful, but I'm talking about cloud infrastructure. I'm not talking about AI applications, which is another spend, okay? But if you look at cloud infrastructure, which is the biggest IT spend in the organization, only 2.5% is spent on AI. And that's because they're careful about usage. Now, it's important to mention, it's also the fastest growing part of your cloud spend. Okay, it's going to grow very big, very fast. But you have to be very conscious on how you do it to make sure it's efficient, to make sure it's secure, and to make sure you understand what happens behind the scenes.
Right, yeah. And so sort of changing tack slightly, we're kind of seeing more startups, independents, kind of deploying products that don't really require big teams. Is kind of related to what you've been saying. Russ, I'll come back to you. What do you think has changed in the stack that's making this possible?
So I think that kind of fundamentally, like LLMs is what's kind of changed everything. So before you had a person that was kind of giving these instructions to a computer, right? This person understands a workflow or some kind of problem, and so they kind of code up instructions to, or an algorithm, a set of things to do, a list, to solve kind of a workflow in a one-size-fits-all kind of way. And now what's happening is that, instead you kind of dictate these instructions in natural language, and then the computer kind of generates the machine instructions to kind of go and perform the action. And so I think fundamentally, that's the core magic. There's a lot of infrastructure you need around it to make it easy to do. And so, for example, what LiveKit does is LiveKit builds infrastructure such that you need less machine instructions because we've packaged them together already to go and accomplish something. But then on the other side of it, you can now leverage an LLM to generate those kind of fewer instructions that you need. So it's this combination of like better infrastructure support plus like a computer that can now do the programming for you. Put together, it just allows you to accomplish things with a much smaller set of human resources than you would have needed in the past to do the same. So.
And is there anything that you're kind of learning about from the ways that those kind of smaller teams are experimenting with infrastructure?
I think the biggest learning from my side, I think smaller teams, the advantage that you have as a small team, as a startup, is velocity, right? The speed and direction, I guess, at which you can move. And so that's why, and so you see startups that don't have product market fit yet, they don't have distribution, they're kind of building from scratch and maximally leveraging this new technology and building kind of like, or attempting to build kind of AI native applications. And so that's why you see lots of demos and early kind of prototypes and even early products that are starting to get some traction out there. On the other end of the spectrum, as Alon was talking about, you have like larger enterprises, and the thing that's tricky about larger enterprises is that they already have product market fit, they already have scale, they have distribution, and so it's a scary thing to potentially lose that by a kind of obviating technology. And so, but also this obviating technology it's not predictable yet, and you have to test it in a different way and observe it in a different way. And so there's kind of like this dichotomy, these two sides, and I think that we've been seeing over time what's been happening is enterprises, now that the tooling is getting better and better, they're getting more comfortable with putting out these products that are AI native and playing like a stronger defensive position against startups that are trying to move super fast and maybe a little bit fast and loose. So I think that's been an interesting thing for us to see happening kind of in front of us.
Yeah, and I think that beyond the velocity, for example, startup is doing a great job in implementing usage of AI beyond the engineering organization. So the big revolution that the LMs did, it actually made everyone a builder. Like my marketer is a builder, my sales guy is a builder now, everyone is a builder. My marketing guy, he needed to find a solution to invite people to follow our LinkedIn page. He developed a browser extension that helped him automate it. And he's never wrote a line of code in his life before that.
So just using sort of vibe coding?
Yeah, just with vibe coding. We're doing all of that. So suddenly everyone in the organization is a builder. Now, in startups, 60-70% of the company is engineers. So the impact of making everyone a builder is small. In bigger enterprises, I don't know, maybe 5% of the organization is engineers, maybe 10%. All the rest are people. So when you're starting to understand that everyone is a builder, the impact is a lot greater in enterprises. And that's really a very, very big challenge of governance. How do I know I'm running efficiently? How I know I'm secure? Now everyone's writing applications that can do stuff automatically. How do I govern all of that? And that's something that I think enterprises should learn from startups on how to enable everyone to become a builder. But at the same time, they have also a lot bigger challenges in making sure they have governance on everything.
Yeah. And I mean, that kind of takes me to my next one. I want to kind of look ahead in the kind of final section of this session. Very broad question. How do you see infrastructure evolving?
So for me, it goes back to our first conversation today around how do you empower the users. In the end of the day, LLMs is a black box, and they're also wired to give you very clear answers very confidently without you knowing whatever's behind the scene. Have you ever heard ChatGPT tell you, oh, I'm not sure, you know what, maybe you should ask Perplexity, they might have the answer? Never. You're always very confident, and very often he's hallucinating, but you'll still be very confident. And I think the future is moving the power to the users, which means, one, understanding what happens behind the scenes so they can get confidence in the results. Two, make sure they're running efficiently. We talked about the fact that AI is extremely expensive. How do I know that I have a positive ROI, and how do I know that it's sustainable in large scale? So now everyone's experimenting, but what will happen when I deploy it to production and make it accessible to the millions of my customers? And number three is making sure it's secured. Because when in the old world of software, when everything was pre-coded and very predictable, you knew what's going to happen, usually. You knew what's going to happen. With AI, you don't have the confidence in what's going to happen. Like the agent is going to decide what to do based on the exact prompt, and like Ross said, like one word here, one word there can change the sequence of events. So you also have to make sure it's very secure. And for me, that's the future of infrastructure on top of the LLMs, to give this governance framework and capabilities for the enterprise and for the organization in general.
I think fundamentally, just tying into what Alon said, I think that when it comes to like building with voice and vision as the input versus text, what we have seen is that all of the kind of the primitives underneath that we have relied upon have to change. So like that goes across compute, and that goes across network, and it goes across storage. So the way you build these applications, the frameworks you use is different than the web application frameworks. And the way that you test these things and evaluate is different than the way that you used to test web applications or that traditional kind of application architecture. The way you deploy and load balance and scale these applications is very different too. It's stateful load balancing, so it looks more like scaling a multiplayer video game than it does like a traditional website. And then the way that you kind of like run these things, the network transport underneath is different. It's more like the network transport that underpins Zoom than it is the network transport of like a web app that you click buttons in and fill out forms. And then on the observability side, how do you capture all of this information in real time? There's transcriptions, there's what the user said, how do those things line up? What language are they speaking? What are the cultural norms of that area, or where that user is kind of connecting from to the agent? Just being able to visualize that, kind of if you think about what New Relic or Datadog does, you have to do it kind of differently than kind of those previous generation of observability tools. And so everything is evolving quite quickly to support this new type of computer program that you can interact with like a human being. That's just something that has never been considered before it was possible now.
Yeah, and so sort of last question: if you each of you were advising a CTO today, where should they be investing in infrastructure to future-proof their AI capabilities?
Yeah, so I'm very biased. And obviously I think CTOs, especially in startups, they should mainly focus on what drives innovation and then think about efficiency. And when I say about innovation, I think the biggest thing is how you accelerate your engineers. A good example is implementing within the organization IDEs like code editors that include agentic capabilities to actually accelerate your engineers. I think that's number one. But number two is efficiency, in my opinion, because things are going to become big very quickly, and you want to make sure that you run efficiently from day one. Because if it's not efficient, it's not sustainable for the long run. It will become very expensive, very fast, and then you would have to start roll back things, and that will be a complete nightmare. So, number one, innovation, what drives engineering velocity, and number two, efficiency.
I think two things. I think one is what kind of Alon said around innovation is one kind of process that needs to be going on at a larger company is just experimentation and rapid iteration on these things. so that, as the kind of core LLM foundation improves and gets better and better, costs come down, you kind of will have de-risked like the product implementation over time through rapid experimentation and learning from those results. Then I think a second thing is something that we haven't talked about at all, but I think is going to become really important, is that these AI agents can manipulate and interact with systems that were historically designed for humans to interact with. And so I think looking at the infrastructure and tools and systems that a company has internally and making sure that there is good interoperability of those systems with agentic systems. So an AI can go in and update records in a database or utilize applications that a human would have traditionally used to have that information. A record is updated and then propagates to another tool that company is using internally. So things like MCP and other types of, there are these standards kind of emerging for how these systems can talk to one another. And I think overhauling them and creating kind of clean APIs and compatibility with some of these older systems that were developed before all of this stuff, I think is like an important and longer arc of effort that can be started now, so that these systems are really well set up for kind of that application that you're building on the experimentation side to take advantage of. So that's what I would say.
Great. Well, I mean, great advice. Lots of awesome takeaways, I think, for our audience. I've certainly learned a lot. So thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our panelists, Alon and
Thanks, Ayesha.
Jeff.
Thank you very much.